Go to 1-800-Flowers.com.
Find the perfect gift.
And wow the people you love.
Wow. This is amazing.
Whether you want to say happy birthday.
So cute.
Or I love you.
I love you too. Thinking of you.
Wow.
Go to 1-800-Flowers.com.
Celebrate the people you love.
Hi, I'm Jim McCann, founder of 1-800-Flowers. I'm not satisfied when I learn something new unless I share it forward. And so we created this podcast to continue that, to share forward the wonderful people we get to meet and most importantly get to learn from and make our lives richer and better. Together we'll cover the human experience. And for me, the human experience is foundational in the idea of relationships. The topics will be far-reaching, but common element you'll see here is it's all about relationships. So I invite you to join us on this journey. Come experience it with us, share your thoughts and ideas, and become part of our community. We'd love to have you. So Greg, I loved your piece on 60 Minutes at Southern Oregon University. It was just, it all connected. So did you travel down to Medford for teaching?
My wife and I moved to Ashland in 1997. Uh-huh. So I worked at Southern Oregon University from 1997 to 2017, and then moved up to McMinnville, where I was a director at the wine education program at Linfield College. When my dad decided to retire, I was at kind of a nice jumping off point from academia, and so came here to Abacela to run the business.
Well, it's a beautiful vineyard, and I love the name. Tell us, where did Abacela comes from?
The pursuit was really my father's desire to get out of the medical profession and get into doing what he grew up in, which was on a farm and producing, a crop. And he really enjoyed wine. He saw a lot of things in wine that he really enjoyed. The process started back in the early or late 80s, early 90s. But we deliberately chose this place to do what we were doing. And the name was a big part of it too. My father was very interested in Spanish varieties, Iberian varieties. In doing so, we kept thinking that there's a couple of things behind a name. And I'm sure you know from the marketing standpoint, one of the big things is it has to be recognizable. Another big thing is that if it's high up in the alphabet, it puts you on the top of the list.
Yes, indeed.
And then if it means something, then it makes a big difference. So my dad and I were both pursuing, kind of trying to find different names, and the whole family came up with lots of different names. But we found in an old dictionary in Spain, and then in the Library of Congress, also in Washington, we found the word abacelar, which is a verb that means to plant a grapevine stick in the hillside. Grapevines are not planted by seed, they're planted by cuttings.
Yep.
And so planting a grapevine stick in a hillside was the verb to plant. And if you do Abacela, it's a first person conjugate of that word.
Starts with an A, it sounds nice, it means something, you got it all. It's a trifecta there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and then the other thing, of course, is that we focus on mostly Spanish grapes, but also Iberian grapes largely. It fits our what we're doing.
I would imagine lots of trips to Spain, lots of cuttings, lots of cultivations to find just the right plants for your soil, for your microclimate.
It's very important. Our whole entire focus in doing what we were doing was really all about finding the right climate.
I read that you were looking to go to you expected to be in California.
Yeah, California. Actually, it could have been New Mexico. It could have been Idaho. It could have been Washington. California was kind of a focus, but really what it came down to is that grapevines do not grow everywhere. Contrary to what you see and hear out there, Cabernet Sauvignon should not be planted everywhere it's planted. What we were looking to do was to find the right climate to be able to grow the variety how we knew it grew in its historic homeland. And so we focused on finding the right climate, the length of the growing season, the type of winter in terms of both moisture and temperatures, the overall heat during the summer, and then the dryness during the summer. So we really focused on a number of things that were related to weather and climate. And soil was kind of secondary, frankly.
Really?
Yeah, soil, there's a little bit of a misnomer out there in the world of growing grapes. Soil is important, don't get me wrong. Very important in terms of how it mediates water and nutrition for the plant system. But for example, take Pinot Noir, which is the Oregon's prominent variety up in the Willamette Valley. Pinot Noir can be grown in hundreds of different types of soils around the world. But the commonality to it is that it has virtually the same kind of climate. The structural, climatic, and weather influences are the main driver. It's not the soil. The soil is the conduit, of course, but if you don't get the climate right, the soil doesn't matter.
My wife and I were recently at a friend's house, and he purchased 3 different bottles of wine from the same estate in the Loire Valley. The difference being where in about a hectare, where it was grown. Was it the rocky side? Was it where there was limestone, where there was deep soil? And I found it fascinating. I'm not cursed with a sophisticated palate. I like wine. I only drink wine, but I can be easily pleased, and it doesn't have to necessarily be expensive. But I was surprised when he did a tasting for us, and we could taste the difference based on where in that hectare it was. And the soil was all the same. It's what other influences were there.
Yeah, and I think what soil does, soil provides the nuances. I mean, I could take you anywhere in the world and show you the same variety on 3 different soils. And as long as the climate is the same, the soils will produce little differences in texture, mouthfeel, aroma characteristics. But you move it outside that climate and it'll perform completely different.
Amazing. What I was intrigued by, Greg, and your appearance on 60 Minutes, first of all, how has that experience been for you post-airing? What has that done in terms of Abacela? What has that done in terms of Professor Greg Jones' brand, inquiries you're getting? What's been the after effects?
Well, in some ways, after, being in academia and doing this kind of research for 25 plus years, it was almost like the icing on the cake for me to some degree. Yep. It was a great experience, just working with the CBS production crew. And, I've done interviews through many different types of media all across the world. And the CBS crew really surprised me in terms of how they approached it, how much they trusted in me to guide them to do the right thing. And it was really a good experience. And so that to me, just the culmination of a lot of research and time I put into it. For Abacela, of course, it gained us some notoriety, but the issue, if you notice in the piece, I never say Abacela. I say Oregon a couple of times. Reason being is that they did not want this piece to be about any one producer. They wanted it to be about the science and the knowledge that we had about the topic. So even though I didn't say Abacela, we got a lot of recognition, of course, from it. I don't know if people look at me different. I do know that my wife and I were just in Vermont. I was at a conference there, and we were in a little small restaurant in a very small town. And somebody recognized me as being on 60 Minutes. And so those kind of things happen. Yeah. And so, I get a lot of family, a lot of wine industry people know me through the work I've done. But now the 60 Minutes piece has just made it even that much more well known.
Here at our day job here at 1-800-Flowers, my brother was the star of also a CBS piece on a show called Undercover Boss. Mm-hmm. And it must be 10 years ago. Could be even 11 years ago, the impact that had on us. Now, of course, our brand was mentioned throughout. The premise was they wanted me to go undercover. The show had not yet aired in any episode, so we're just hearing about the concept. And I said no the first few times they asked us. And then finally I said, well, okay, I'll do it, but I won't do it. And they said, what? I said, I'll do it, but here's the premise. Instead of this opening scene It'll open up with my brother and I. He's 10 years my junior. He's destined to run the company. I'll be asking him to go undercover to make sure he knows all of the different brands we have in the company with the same knowledge he has about the flowers brand. A friend of mine ran CBS at the time, and they rolled it up to him. That was a Friday. And on Monday, they called back and said, okay, we'll do it the way you suggest, but we have one condition. What's that? We want you to surprise him in the field, and it has to genuinely be a surprise, and he can't know. So I said, so you're asking me to torture him? And they said, in a matter of speaking, I said, I've been doing that my whole life. That's not a big ask. So we did it, and my brother Chris did a terrific job on it. And indeed, I did surprise him a couple of times in the show, once in California, once in New York at one of our stores. And it was great fun. But what a branding event, like you just experienced. I was in the UK 2 years ago. I got in late in London. I went to the restaurant in the hotel just to grab something quick, like at 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And there are two couples at a table nearby, and they come over to say, oh, we saw you on Undercover Boss. I said, well, that was quite some time ago. They said, no, we saw it last night.
Yeah.
So in the UK, it was just airing anew.
Yeah.
So it something big like CBS, or for you, even bigger, the cherry on the Sunday of CBS, 60 Minutes, I think it'll have positive ramifications on you and your brand and your life for years and years to come.
I know that it played in Australia, also in Europe, but also here in the United States, it played 3 different times.
Oh, wow.
It played we had Christmas on Saturday last year, and it played on Sunday. And then they played it after the Super Bowl, and the Super Bowl didn't go long. It ended right on time. So the segment was after the Super Bowl.
Largest possible audience.
It's gotten some play to it. It's I've had colleagues in Australia tell me that they saw it as well.
And if I mention it to anybody, they all say the same thing. Champagne being produced in the UK?
Yeah, exactly. So I didn't really say it in the CBS piece of it, but the UK situation is not too different than the Willamette Valley of Oregon. If you go back to 1950, early 1960, there was nobody producing Pinot Noir in Oregon. There was a couple of small plantings here and there, but we're not talking there was no commercial production. And that was largely because the climate wasn't conducive to it. Fast forward into the 70s and 80s and 90s, and the pioneers that came and were first planting Pinot Noir made it through some pretty tough vintages because of climate. And then they planted and managed the crop, and they got a really good vintage, then 2 good vintages, and then before you know it, the place is much more consistent today. And there are other places in the world that have played out like that. Tasmania didn't produce much in terms of wine grapes 50 years ago, and now it is. It's one of the frontiers in Australia, and the UK is the same thing. An article just came out recently talking about the future of Chardonnay in the UK, not only for sparkling, but for dry wine. And this conference I went to last week in Vermont, it was a cold climate conference. And I had wines there from Denmark, Sweden, Quebec, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and they were good.
How you set the table with the idea that grapes and grape growing gives you an insight into history and the nuance of history. And I found that to be intriguing. Give us a little color on, first of all, the fact that wine was first made, as best we can tell, in 6000 BC.
We don't really know how certain alcoholic beverages came to be. Likely they were happenstance that
Yes.
just occurred in nature. I mean, it could have been that grape berries fell in a leaf and were there just long enough that they fermented, and someone drank it. And same thing could be said for honey that went bad, or beer that kind of spontaneously kind of started being made. When I was in my PhD program, one of the things that transpired was I was studying to be a climatologist. And when you're a climatologist, you have to kind of pick your zones of what you're doing.
Sure.
So I went down the path of wanting to study agriculture. Many of my professors were pushing me into, or suggesting, I should say, that I look at broadacre crops, things like soybean, corn, rice, wheat. We had some model systems that we could look at and understand how we could understand climate impacts on feeding the planet. And one of the things that really hit me was I was already aware of the wine industry from a couple of different perspectives, but I knew that the wine industry had history, geography, romanticism, art, economics, soil science, biology, chemistry. I mean, we can go on and on and on. And I thought, do I study rice or do I study something that has this rich fabric of history?
And you can only eat so much rice.
Exactly. Now, I probably would have, done well, and if I had worked in some of these other systems, but the wine industry to me just seemed like the natural. And then the other piece of it is my dad was doing what he was doing here about the same time, and so our careers supported each other.
Tell us about Abacela. How big a property do you have there? What varieties are you growing?
Our entire property is a little over 460 acres.
Wow, that's huge.
But we have 76 acres of grapes planted, and we're likely to plant about another 12 to 14. We started the planting in 1995, and our first blocks of vines were some of the first planting of those varieties in the entire Pacific Northwest. Tempranillo, Graciano, Albarino, many varieties that were very unique at the time. So we planted our first vineyard in 95, and then we planted out the rest of the 76 acres through about 2005. And so across those 76 acres, we grow 17 different varieties. Here in Oregon, for example, if you're growing in the Willamette Valley, you likely are growing 1, 2, or maybe 3 varieties. Here in Southern Oregon, where the climates are a little warmer, we can produce a wider range of varieties. And what we've done is we've focused on varieties that are mostly Iberian. Of course, Tempranillo, Grenache, Graciano, much more of a Spanish kind of framework, but also many Portuguese varieties. We have Tinta Amarela, Tinta Cao, Touriga Nacional, Bastardo. And we use those to make 100% varietal wines, but also to make a port style wine. And then we also have a collection of other varieties that have done well here. French varieties like Malbec and Syrah. Another Spanish variety, Albarino, our white variety. We also grow Viognier, which is a French variety. We have one Italian variety, Dolcetto, that we've had since almost the beginning, and it's a very nice variety. But our main focus is largely those Spanish, Portuguese varieties.
And what are primary outlets for your production? Where do you sell it?
Well, we're fortunately a fairly large tasting room, direct to consumer location. We're not near a metropolitan area, of course, and so we're on a very strong north, south, east, west set of roads for tourism. Yep. Of course, I-5 going north and south, but also Highway 42 going to Bandon to the Oregon coast, and then Highway 138 going to Crater Lake and Diamond Lake and the waterfalls up to the North Umpqua.
So Crater Lake area is just beautiful.
Yeah, so we generate quite a bit of tourism, direct to consumer sales. Now we have distribution throughout the state of Oregon, a lot on the coast, quite a bit up in the Portland area, a little bit over in Eastern Oregon. We have a little bit in Washington, Idaho, and California, and then a couple of small markets back east. But because we're so much direct to consumer, we have a very large wine club as well. We have a tendency to try to focus much more on those kind of markets.
Greg, the reason why tasting rooms are just an experiential way for people to experience your brand, your products, and and feel and understand the farm, the acreage, and that begets a lot of people who then develop an affinity for your brand and your product and become members of your wine club. And every winery, every wine grower would like to have the majority of their product go to their wine club customers, be on allocation, because you don't have any middlemen then, and you have a real relationship with your customers. If they've been to your tasting room, when they open up a bottle of your Malbec, when they're back home, they don't just smell and taste it then. They're transported back to when they were in the taste room, when they were with friends, and they're having a great interaction with your people. Maybe they even get a chance to see or hear you and hear about the soil and the different ingredients that go into the production in terms of the amount of sunlight there is and the amount of where the water flow comes from. They get all of those experiences come back to them. And so it's a lot more than opening a bottle from someplace you've never heard of and tasting it. It has context and it has memory.
Well, my father and I tried to enhance this quite a bit. Back in, we built our latest tasting room back in 2010 and 11. And when we did it, we were setting up the landscape so that it was a very inviting place. But we dedicated an area called our Wine Growers Walk. And it's just a small area, maybe about 50 feet long, where we direct our customers to take a walk to learn about Abacela. What I did is my dad and I worked together. I produced multiple posters that we put in kind of a national park signage kind of framework, big thick timber. And so we put this together in our Wine Growers Walk so that somebody could go out there and learn about why we're here, what's the geologic framework behind it, what's the soil framework behind it, what's the climate framework, and then what varieties we grow on what blocks and how we do it, and then any sustainability kind of things that we do. Even when we're busy and our tasting room can't answer all the questions, that educational component is there. The other thing that we do, we're starting to, believe it or not, already look at next year. I will be doing twice a week tours, so people can schedule a tour with me. And what I would do is I would take them out to the vineyard. We would try wine in the vineyard, talk about growing grapes, then come back in and do a tour through the winery. We try some wine there, and then end up in the tasting room talking about the wider range of what we do.
That sounds like a great experience. That sounds exactly like what wine lovers would really appreciate, getting to meet the person who had the passion, the second generation. I mean, it's got it all. Is there a website that you would direct people to learn more about you?
We're in the middle of putting the calendar together. It hasn't been fully posted out for 2023, but it'll be roughly April through October, whenever the weather's good, and people can go in there. And it'll be under Abacela.com tours or events. We haven't fully settled on that yet. I apologize.
Yep. And if they want to join a wine club, people can go to the same place.
Yeah, we have everything is listed on the website, of course, and you can join the wine club, find out what the different categories for the wine club are. But the twice a week event tours with me will be by reservation only.
Down in the Rogue Valley where you lived and taught, living in that wonderful town of Ashland, lots going on there in terms of climate change. And as a climatologist, we'd love to hear your thoughts on what's happening. As we approach the holidays here, our main production at Harry and David, we're known for our pears. Now we grow unbelievably delicious peaches and some apples, kiwis, grapes, and we have one hillside in the northern part of the valley that we'd love to plant more grapes on.
Mhm.
I mean, it just looks like Napa to me. Of course, being a little bit high desert, it's going to be a different variety, and we'd love to get your thoughts in the future on what varieties we should plant there. But it's just a beautiful hillside, and we have a beautiful farmhouse at the bottom of that hill that would make a great tasting room someday if we ever get to that. But there are some wonderful little wineries in the Rogue Valley that I'm sure you're familiar with. The big challenge we've had as growers of terrific product, particularly our Commis pears, is competition for labor from the cannabis growers who popped up in the last several years. They seem to be fading away, though, as the economics of cannabis have changed so quickly in the last half a dozen years. A lot of those cannabis growers seem to be giving up their effort.
We put our heart into everything we do. We are farmers, bakers, florists, and makers who grow and create with a passion. 1-800-Flowers. Share with love.
So we're concerned about all the natural challenges we faced in the last several years. We have 5,000 acres of production. We're having to move where we pay attention to our product. Our trees take about 5, 6, almost 7 years before they're really bearing consumable fruit. And it's a grafted tree that we use to create the Corniche pear. So it's a long cycle, 7 years from the time we started in a greenhouse till we're able to harvest from it. So we have to make long-term decisions. We've, of course, in the Rogue Valley experienced fires a little over a year ago that were horrific. We've had hailstorms when they've never occurred, and we have severe water challenges, which has retarded our crop. So we used to sell off a lot of our crop because we produce a lot more than we needed. Not the case anymore. We're just growing to what we need. Your thoughts on how climate is impacting agriculture, particularly in the area that you know so well, and should we be buying land further north?
Well, yeah, it's a really good question. And I just going back to my time in the Rogue Valley, I did quite a bit of work for different grower groups in the area. And I worked a little bit with the pear industry there. As a matter of fact, I probably on my computer today still have the data. I had flowering dates for, I think, 3 different species going back to 1931 in the valley. And I had started a project trying to pull out some of the Peter Britt data on flowering dates going back into the late 1800s. But we looked at that data, and it was pretty clear that there was springtime trends, but that springtime frost didn't go away.
Yes.
So there's still risk on top of it, even though the conditions got better. But, you know, I over the time I was there, I watched the pear industry contract a little bit, of course. Yeah, probably, you know, competition from other hemispheres and other regions and a little bit of climate-based kind of issues, of course. One of the other things that we did, I can't remember the exact year on this. I want to say probably about 2012 or 13. It's pretty clear that urban areas have a tendency to influence climate, especially temperature. You hear about urbanization as a part of climate change because big cities are warming much more rapidly.
Yeah.
And the Bear Creek Valley is seeing the same thing. Back again, it was sometime maybe 2012, 13. A student of mine and I were looking at data from the airport, of course, in Medford, outside stations, either outside the main core of the Bear Creek Valley or in other valleys like the Applegate Valley. And what we found is that roughly in the mid to late 70s, the basic trends in temperature started separating. The warming rate was nearly 3 times greater at the Medford airport than it was in their outer lying areas.
Is that right?
Yeah. So if you are planting anything in and around Medford, you're going to have to deal with frost risk, but you've got a much warmer environment than you do in the outer lying areas. The other piece of this, we did We did a project. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. They're little tiny temperature sensors called hobos. We put some hobos in a few different places to try to figure out what the frost line was. Not the frost line, really, the fog line is more like it. So,
Yep.
when the valley down there fills in with fog,
Yes.
what is the average height of that fog? And then what does that do for temperature and phenology of grapevines? We were looking at grapevines at the time.
Uh-huh.
There's a place over, I think it's called Carpenter Hill Road, Independence Road.
Yes.
Yeah, that's not too far from where you are.
Mm-hmm.
We had one location where we had two vineyards that were separated by about 150 feet in elevation. And yet the phenology was almost 2 to 2.5 weeks different. The phenology above, because it's above the fog line, was much more advanced than the phenology down below the fog line. It varied a little bit year to year, but that was the kind of information we were seeing.
I'm always surprised. I'm a city kid. I grew up in New York, but I just love the agriculture and learning about it. And we have such passionate people who've been involved with the agricultural management for us in the Rogue Valley for so long, and they love what they do. They're passionate about it. They know so much about it. It's just special people with unbelievable knowledge. So we have, I think, 17 or 18 different orchards that we tend to manage. And first of all, when you're out there for the blossom, it's majestic. It's such a pretty valley. When you're there for the pear blossom, it's magic. And to see the bees who do their work for us and never complain, and then to watch the June drop and to hear Matt Bauman, our head ag guy, tell my wife and I about, well, you see this on this branch, you see there are 4, sometimes 5 different pear buds. And our pears grow to an average about a pound apiece. He said, so the Mother Nature knows that branch can't support it, all 5 of them. So Mother Nature picks the best one and pushes the others off and drops them to the ground. And to hear him tell his story, and I'm completely engaged listening to it and hearing about it and why how we graft this, treat it out to get these unusual pears, because unlike the pears that most of us know from grocery stores at all, they're hard and they're tough-skinned, where ours are big and juicy and thin-skinned. So how we harvest them, how we clean them, how we package them, how we handle them is got to be very different, because they easily bruise or cut, and we can't have that. But I just love learning from smart people like you, Greg, and from Matt Bauman, our head ag guy, about ag and its impact, and now learning from smart people like you who are climatologists, who are telling us what we should be thinking about in terms of growing, where we should be moving our production, and what is better suited to where we are as we deal with these climate change issues.
Well, it's interesting you bring up Matt. I know Matt. I actually was involved with Harry and David when he first came to Harry and David.
Is that right?
Yeah, and I was pretty good friends with his predecessor too, Mito Agumata.
I never knew him. I'm just in the Matt Bauman era.
When Mito was doing that position, I had quite a few students who did internships with Harry and David. They were doing, pest monitoring, irrigation monitoring, things like that. And then when Matt came on, there was a time period there that I was helping do some statistical modeling, looking at kind of climate and frost-related issues, so that we could help the Harry and David. So Matt and I know Matt fairly well. And as a matter of fact, I just looked at my email. I got we exchanged emails about a month ago. He asked me about some climate modeling data, and I shared with a couple of things with him, and he was going to try to use that information to kind of develop a broader kind of perspective for your business.
Matt thinks we have some perfect conditions to grow kiwi.
People are pushing it. There's a few up here in the Umpqua Valley who are growing kiwi berries. Where a kiwi berry is it's a smaller berry, and it's used for a little bit more for juice and jams and things like that. But there's a guy up here that's got quite a few acreage, and it doesn't have quite the same frost issue. There's a little bit of kiwi out in out in Sam's Valley off of Ramsey Road.
Yes.
So out just a little bit north of where you are. I think that they've had a little bit of frost issue down there, but I think their crop typically is pretty good too.
For the people who don't understand, we're talking about Harry and David is in the Rogue Valley, headquartered in the town of Medford, but we grow all through the valley. It's a wonderful valley, a couple of 100,000 people, southwest Oregon, about an hour and a half south of Abacela wineries, where you are, Greg, and where that beautiful valley behind you is located. But Oregon's a big state, a great ag state, and quite long north to south. I guess you'd probably still be another 2.5 hours to Portland.
2.5, almost 3. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's quite a big state, and it's got the influences of the Pacific Ocean with this craggly coastline. You mentioned Brandon just being west of you, and then you have that atmospheric impact of mist blowing in off the Pacific Ocean into all different kinds of terrain, high elevation, low elevation, high desert, beautiful valleys. So it's quite an interesting collection of microclimates. So you must be...
And you know, what you're bringing up is kind of very important. Oregon is a very wide-ranging agricultural state. We're top 10 in multiple crops around, from grass seeds to onions and potatoes to cherries to Christmas trees to pears to wine grapes. We're in the top 10 in the country for many things, and we do them in very specific places. But we also are a West Coast environment, meaning that we're going to have wet winters and dry summers. And in a climate change standpoint, the big challenge there is that what we are seeing is that those kind of growing environments tend to get drier in the summer and wetter in the winter. But the wetter in the winter typically is happening more in rain events where the snow level is creeping upward over time because of temperature changes.
But from an ag point of view, we do need snowpack.
Exactly. And so that's a kind of a real challenge for, I think, especially for Oregon, but really for California, where without snowpack, they're really in trouble.
Yep.
So the issues is that these West Coast climates, and you can look at Australia, Chile, other places in the world that have similar kind of frameworks. We've all been seeing that their summers are getting drier, and yet those summertime environments are now more open to hail and thunderstorm activity because a warmer atmosphere becomes more, it turns over more, so to speak, and you have a greater potential for thunderstorm activity, like we did in August of 2020.
Yeah, caused all those fires then.
Yeah, exactly. Those kind of events, the August thunderstorm that came out of the Pacific and moved across Northern California and up into Oregon is extremely rare. But in a climate that has been changing over time, they're more likely.
So, Greg, I've been trying to educate myself and ourselves a lot about the climate and climate change. I still run across so many people who want to think that there isn't a climate problem. They just want to put their heads in the sand. I'm not sure why, although I would tell you I'm probably guilty of it myself, or had been. Tell us, what evidence is there that climate is changing, and more importantly, is the change the result of man's activities, like you just mentioned about urbanization, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, I think I can go back into my career and talk a little bit about it as well. When I was first training to be an environmental scientist and a climatologist back in the late 80s, early 90s, the jury was still out. Science doesn't work on belief systems. Science works on a framework of collecting data, testing theories, and you keep retesting until you are more and more sure. Back when I first started out, I remember my professors, this was just a spectacular debate going on about kind of how climates were changing and what role humans had in it. And I can tell you back then that the science, and when I'm saying science, I'm meaning all geoscientists in the world, were roughly on the fence, 50-50. And so there was this idea that, well, humans are potentially, influencing climate, but climates are changing. And so people were trying to test and understand that. You fast forward to where we are today, that same scientific group is 99% on the side that humans, with everything that we do, are changing the energy balance of this planet. And what I mean by everything we do, we often just talk about fossil fuels and greenhouse gases, but it's urbanization, desertification, deforestation, ocean acidification. It's everything we do. And
what we grow, it's what we eat.
Exactly. Agriculture is part of the problem, part of the solution too. But the challenge is that 6, 7, 8 billion people on the planet can't help but change the radiative balance of our planet. We clearly know today that humans are responsible for a certain amount of climate change. Not, we can't put a finger on any individual event and say this happened because of climate change, but we know that they're more likely, more common. For example, the heat wave that we had in 2021 in June, late June, we know that that was a very extreme event, but it likely wouldn't have happened if we hadn't experienced the changes in climate that we've seen today.
So what can we point to on our dashboard, Greg, of things that as a people we're watching to measure changes in climate? Is carbon center of that dashboard?
I think it's center because that's what we can potentially do the most about. If we can develop systems that are operating under alternative fuel sources. I mean, you've seen in the news probably just recently, the scientists have had quite a bit of success in fusion, where they've actually generated more power than it took to cause the reaction.
It took 60 years to get here, but the consequences are fairly enormous, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. They really are. The other thing that just recently happened in science is the idea of being able to separate hydrogen, for hydrogen power. And so I think we're getting to places in which, I remember many, many years ago, I was at a talk by, it was a CEO, and I can't remember his name, for Shell Oil. And he said, the Stone Age didn't end for lack of stones. And I always thought that was a great way to put it. I do think that we need to look at energy sources that are, number one, non-radiative changing in the planetary system, but also sustainable over long times and don't cause other issues. I think that's a really big piece. So this whole issue of carbon is really an important one. But we also need to, as we develop cities, as we develop areas in which we live and work, we need to be thinking about how we can develop those places so that they're more radiative friendly in terms of our planet.
It seems like, those of us who don't have the knowledge that you have about climate, its changes, and ag, and its impact on our lives and our food stocks and our environment. We need a dashboard of things that we can look at, empirical data that tells us we're headed in the right direction or we're not. And I think it says, you say both things: reducing the amount we emit, being cognitive of the impact of our urbanization efforts and what that does to the environment around us, being better about that, and finally, looking for clean energy sources. I have a friend who is a nuclear physicist, and he worked as the CTO of Ford Motor Company. His name is Ken Washington. And now he works for Amazon, and he runs their robotics business. And as a nuclear physicist, I thought when I asked him this question that fully expected a different answer. I said, Ken, if you were the czar of all energy tomorrow, where would you have us focus our efforts? And he didn't say nuclear. He did say, I wouldn't decommission nuclear. I wouldn't chase it away. If it's there, it's in place, permitted. Yes, let's continue with it as long as we possibly safely can. But he said he'd put all his efforts behind solar because the technology has advanced so much, and now they're able to take solar and get it up to about 1,200 degrees of a burn point, and you need 1,400 degrees to make steel. Steel manufacturers a huge carbon emission business, so we're getting close on so many fronts. And I think we just need an all-out effort to help raise our consciousness of the impact we as people have on the planet and the things, as you pointed out, in all different areas that we can influence that in terms of planning, in terms of food, in terms of agriculture, in terms of how we live, and of course, the energy we need and use, and moving to energy sources that aren't ruining the soup we live in.
Yeah, I think there's another piece of this that's really important. You said this idea of having a dashboard. I'd like to think about it as being aware. If we don't perceive the risk because we're not aware of the risk, then you can't act. Having an awareness, and it's kind of like, just think about the general American who goes into a grocery store and buys a watermelon in January. We probably shouldn't be doing that. Well, if that watermelon is always there, the person's always going to buy it. It's this kind of consumer kind of based process. Watermelons in January in Madison, Wisconsin are coming from Mexico or somewhere further south. We have to ship them, and there's more carbon likely in that one watermelon than what you do driving your car for a couple of days during the winter. So the carbon-based issues are really complex, but if we're not even aware what they are, then how can we even perceive what the issues are?
And it's telling a story like that helps us, the general public, understand the impact. It's a wonderful analogy to share. I had a climate event put on by Worth Media back in September in New York, in conjunction with the UN Climate Week. Seth Godin was a closing speaker. And I admire Seth and all that he does and has done in his career. It's been remarkable. But he gave us one of those pearls just like you did. He told us that your landscaper who uses a leaf blower with a single stroke engine, 1 hour of a leaf blower emits more dirty carbon than the same person who drives their Toyota Corolla from New York to LA. Same equal carbon emission. Yeah. That's remarkable. 1 hour of a leaf blower, which is why he said, we have to act from a legislative and governing point of view to force the kinds of changes we need. But that has stuck in my mind since September when Seth made that comment in his closing remarks at the conference. And then when he produced the Carbon Almanac, and he has the data to back all of that up, it really is remarkable. And anyone I've told that to just goes, wow. Just like buying a watermelon in January. Yeah.
I mean, I can even give you a personal relationship to some of this. And it comes down to the scarcity of product or the cost of the product. This has to do with rechargeable batteries. I have quite a few devices that I use rechargeable batteries for. But if you go out and try to buy rechargeable batteries, you can't find them. If you go to any of the major big box stores, they typically don't. You've got a battery kiosk here, and they've got like 2 options in rechargeable, and they've got hundreds of options and everything else. I just this past week, I went to get some rechargeable batteries for something, and I had to go to 4 stores. I spent more carbon trying to find the dang things than it was probably worth. That's just an example. And then rechargeable batteries tend to be about 4 times the cost of a regular battery.
Behaviorally, we're being pushed to do things that aren't good for our environment.
Yeah. And there's a lot of it. Even solar, I think solar panels have come such a long way. The ability to get more and more energy out of smaller and smaller cells is really important. But when it costs tens of thousands of dollars for me to put solar on my roof, something's not right there. At a given point, that kind of technology is going to have to become affordable to general populations. Otherwise, we're not going to accept it.
The behavior is not going to change.
Yeah.
Well, we've learned so much from you today, Greg. What a thrill it must have been to be one of your students at Southern Oregon University there. I wish I was smart enough to pay attention to school that I could have gotten into the school to have a chance to take your class. But we all get a chance to see the product of your work and your knowledge by visiting Abacela.com and learning about those tours you're going to be giving in the spring. That sounds like the perfect combination of education, outdoor experience, and unbelievable tasting.
Yeah, there you go.
Being able to experience the wine in the vineyards, tasting the grapes before they're processed, and then having the finished product. We're so lucky that we had heard about you, and Matt Bowman told us some wonderful things about you, which caused us to reach out after we saw the 60 Minutes piece you did. So thanks for being so generous with your time and your knowledge and your wisdom. We've learned so much from you today, and I hope we get to continue the dialogue. But in the meantime, thanks for sharing your time and energy with us today, and we're hoping that you and your family have a terrific Oregon holiday.
Yes, thank you very much, Jim. Take care. You too. Happy holidays.
Bye-bye now.
This is birthday.
Go to 1-800-Flowers.com.
They have tons of great birthday gifts.
Wow.
Wow.
Happy birthday, baby.
Wow.
Yummy. I got to contain myself.
1-800-Flowers.
Celebrate the people you love.
Well, I hope you enjoyed what you heard, and I know I'll be sharing it forward. I hope you get to as well. Let's keep the conversation going. Follow me along on Twitter at Jim1800Flowers and on LinkedIn at Jim McCann. Hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to Celebrations Chatter. You can join our community by reaching out at chatter@celebrations.com. And while you're at it, tell us what topics you'd like us to explore here on the Celebrations Chatter podcast. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to share it forward.